Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back for our first in-person brown bag, well, hybrid brown bag for a long time. Glad to see we had so many people here. We also want to say hello to our people who are online. We are trying for this newsletter to do most of our programmings both in person and an online option for people who want to join that way. So wanted to thank you all for coming. Of course, my name is Jeremy. I'm the Museum Services Manager here for the Sandusky Library. And I just wanted to tell you what our next month's brown bag is, just so everyone's aware of it. It's Lights Out, Everybody, Mystery and Horror During the Golden Age of Radio. And that will be, of course, same time, noon on October 19th here at the library, and you can join us in person. We do ask that you do sign up for that program, so you can either do that on our website or call the library, get down to the reference desk, we'll sign you up. It takes 30 seconds. We can only have so many people in these programs due to COVID restrictions right now. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for the day. He's going to do a much better job introducing himself than I could. And we're all set to go.
My name is Jim Van Keuren.
I'm going to ask just for the online, because we don't ask you to stand behind the podium.
All right.
There we go.
My name is Jim Van Keuren, and I'm a retired Dean of the College of Education at Ashland University. And prior to that, I was a school superintendent, and I worked at the State Department where I was Assistant State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And then for a short period of time, I was Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so my whole career has been in education. What prompted this is that we have a place on Put-in-Bay. We've been up there for 34 years. And my wife used to have a clothing store there called the Puddle Duck. And some of the islanders said, you know, if you really look into it, Jim, Camp Perry used to have POWs that were housed there. And then Jeff Kaler, who's the editor of the Put-in-Bay Gazette, said, you know, you go down to Saunders Cottages down at the state park, those used to be POW hutments that were moved from Camp Perry over to Put-in-Bay. So I had written a book about my father-in-law's experience during World War II, where he served in a medical unit. And it just kind of prompted, I just finished that book, and this kind of prompted my interest in looking at the POW, and especially for this part of the state. So then I connected with I had a library where we're just fillings of materials and newspaper articles dating back from that time. And then Peggy Dybin, the historical curator at Ottawa County Museum. Part of that museum is dedicated to the POWs that were at Camp Perry, so I was able to leverage some of her work and incorporated that into the book. So I'm going to start here, and we'll go through it. And all the photos that are on this PowerPoint are from the book. And the book, the library does have the book here, and they have it at some of the branch camps too. So we'll get started.
With the farmers and the owners of that property, and they were very positive about the POW. One who said in 1970 she had gone to Germany to visit and was doing a tour, and the tour guide mentioned that he had been a POW in the United States, and she said, well, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and he said, well, you know, I was really treated fairly at Camp Perry, and he said, I really have pleasant memories. Well, I think the pleasant memories stem from the fact they were fed well, they were clothed well, and they had the opportunity to get out of the camp and work. So it's really contrary to what our GIs experienced in Europe and in Japan.
Yeah.
This is.
I'll have you switch again because I need to.
I can't get used to that.
Sorry.
These are photos that were taken at Camp Perry. There's Italian. Over up above the title of the book were some Italians in a cafeteria where they were cooking. The one is where they were. There was a hutments there, and then they were lounging around and talking. Got to see the other. And the other one are German officers that were being transported across the United States to various camps. And then down below to the right is would be Italians when they first came to Camp Perry, and that was in October of 1943. And then that's the entrance to Camp Perry, the other photo. I dedicated the book to the men and women at Camp Perry and the Erie Proving Grounds, which was adjacent to it. And E.C. McCormick, that skipped too fast. This is a photo of the camps across the United States during this time. We had 60 camps, 511 base camps, and 175 branch camps.
During World War II, Allied forces took 600,000 Italians as prisoners of war. 51,000 were brought to the United States.
When we left there, we don't know what went on. We only saw America when we arrived. That's how America said, this is another world.
They were only young men when the war made them soldiers. They left their homes and their families behind, never imagining the future that awaited them.
You know me, you called me. But America gave you free.
One day before, which was a better chance than going to Russia. I was sent to Tunisia, which was a former French colony.
See, I was drafted in the army to be a guard. That's what we were trained for from the time I went in till they busted us up.
The Geneva Convention states that the prisoners that were here, which were non-commissioned officers and enlisted men, could work on non-war related projects, which meant that they could work in the agricultural fields or the lumber industry or the rice fields. Morning wake up was probably around 7, but probably breakfast at 8. Of course, we were assigned to work details, and until at 8 o'clock, for a while I worked on farms.
They were working, I believe they drawed something like 80 cents a day. I don't think they drawed it money, but they drawed it in slips where they could spend it and buy stuff with it.
On their days off or when they weren't working, they would engage in all sorts of different activities. They started a school where they learned everything from history to English to foreign languages. They would do construction projects and build fountains. They had painting classes. They had orchestras here to entertain themselves. And then we go on Nazis. I was in Italy, was from 14 to 18. And grew up in the Nazi doctrine. Hitler was the leader and all that stuff. But I was not very well liked by ardent Nazis. I spoke enough English to make myself understood. There were orders given what to do. I had to translate. When you're a prisoner of war, you have to make a decision. The power were the guards, and that took me forward. Because I made friends with guards, and then by and large, it was always my favor.
I'd say I was lucky to be a prisoner of war guard. We wasn't fighting overseas. When they busted up, see, I went to the infantry. And I don't know much about that.
The number of Germans that were here in the United States were 371,000, and 50,000 Italians and 3,900 Japanese. I think the Japanese were on the West Coast. I could find that. But we had close to 8,000 POWs, with Camp Perry having over 6,000 POWs, Italians and Germans here locally. They had to give up in the beginning. This is a photo of a German prisoner of war giving up the Iron Cross and the second class being removed. Eventually, those were returned. This is a German officer at Camp Perry. This photo shows that his at that time. Non-commissioned officers were mainly at the camp, and they didn't have to work. They could sit back, and but a lot of them did work, and some of them helped as translators. These are German POW officers receiving their valuables back as they get ready to be transported across the United States to various camps. One of the big locations was in Boston, where they were housed there and then sent across the country.
In the latter days of World War II, the Allies were racking up victories. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of captured German soldiers began pouring into the U.S.
Large convoys are crossing the ocean with boatloads of war prisoners.
New York, the Statue of Liberty, the skyscrapers, I've never seen anything like this.
In the United States, the men are assigned to permanent prison camps scattered all over the country.
You notice there's a guard on top of the train there, and so they were closely watched as they got on the train. Transported to various camps across the country. That was a huge problem. We weren't ready for this. We had to develop a transportation system, and we also had to develop camps. And the good thing about Camp Perry, it was already there. It already had hutments for when they did training before. So it was a natural. But a lot of places across the country, it was really tough times trying to do that. And the transportation was a nightmare. When you have 425,000 POWs here in the country at that time, you have a problem of trying to transport all of them across the country. This is an example of an entrance to a POW camp. This was in Indiana. You can see the high barbed wire around there, and they did have guard towers all throughout that area. Here's an example of a guard tower. Camp Perry had 11 guard towers around it. This bust right there, that was Bing Crosby. I hope he wasn't entertaining the prisoners, but what the photo I got, it said he was at that camp at this time. That's a photo of his van, and that's just to give you an example of a guard tower. It's interesting, it's a problem for the camps. You can see that that says because of a huge number of POWs and the lack of guards that we had at that time, they gave kind of the reign to the camps to the POWs, especially the Germans. Italians weren't a problem. Germans were still hardcore, and you can see it says way work done against reason or risk. In other words, take a calculated risk. And often that calculated risk was a mistake, because in turn then they would get, the Nazis would control those that weren't so advocate about the Nazi regime. And so they would have kangaroo courts, and there would be problems that the Americans would have to contend with. This is an example of a demand for work. Agriculture was the big piece in Camp Perry and West Ohio. So it gives you an idea of some of the area kind of work that was being done at this time. Up in Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula, since I'm originally from Kalamazoo, was a big that were in the Upper Peninsula. This is an example of the makeup of the camps from Camp Perry. And if you notice that Salina was a short period of time, they were released from Camp Perry and then sent to Salina to do harvesting of crops. Defiance was more of a industrial or small company setup where the POWs worked. Fort Wayne, Camp Perry was over Fort Wayne at camp. 900 center from that site. Marion, Wilmington was harvesting of corn at that time for hogs. Bowling Green was tomatoes. Rossford Ordnance Center was a center for transportation. They had a huge center with jeeps and other mobile equipment was sent across the seas. Fletcher General Hospital is down in Cambridge, Ohio. I was a school superintendent outside of Cambridge at one time. Never realized Fletcher was there. Fletcher was for orthopedic. They had more than 17,000 of our troops that they treated, and the main thrust there was orthopedic surgery and orthopedic care. Carle Hospital in Parma they had over 15,000 soldiers that were treated, wounded soldiers. Today it's the western campus of Tri-C. They tried to make, when they did Tri-C, they tried the buildings kind of like. And Crowell Hospital was where it was the founding of the Cleveland Clinic, was the start of the Cleveland Clinic. And today if Jim Banks, if you ever visit there, has a museum there about the POWs that were at that site. The other interesting thing, adjacent to Camp Perry, was the Erie Proving Ground. They had close to 1,000 POWs and 5,000 civilians from the community that worked at that site. And what they did is they recalibrated fire artillery. Artillery was recalibrated there at Erie Proving Ground. This map's not so good, but it kind of gives you a layout where the camps were. Up where Camp Perry is, I put Erie Proving Grounds, Crowell Hospital, and up in Cuyahoga County. Clinton County at the bottom on the left is where they were there for a short period of time. So it kind of gives you a spread of those, not including Fort Wayne and that particular camp, but that kind of gives you a POW camp locations that were affiliated with Camp Perry. I mean, when the Italians were first here, this was the Camp Perry Strength Report, kind of how the jobs were set out and how these were only Italians at that time because the Germans didn't come until June of 1944. And they eventually replaced all of the Italians and Camp Perry became a German POW camp and the Italians went to Erie Proving Grounds to work at that site. That kind of gives you an idea of the various work that was done at that time. And that was the main thrust of having 421,000 prisoners of war here is with the labor force. You know, all the men were working at that, or were in the service at that time. And we had a huge labor shortage, and especially in the agricultural region where you needed that to harvest the crops. So they played a major role in doing that. This is Defiance. It's this POW camp. The reason I put this in here shows that they worked at various little businesses in Defiance. And if you vacation time was quite lengthy, 1700 to 1850. So it's hour and 15 minutes of transportation. Some was close. Some got some pretty good lunch breaks. Where only the one up, first one was only a half hour, but then you look at some of the others and they got a lunch break of an hour, and it must be because of the type of work they were doing. But that's where all the prisoners were then in Defiance were housed there, and that's the kind of work they did at that time. This is Camp Perry Italians at a canteen at Camp Perry. They go and hit. Originally, there was not beer there. Once the Germans came, that changed. But this shows the POWs at the canteen drinking soda at this time, and they needed they got paid in a certificate, and this would be a coupon book, and they would use this for doing at the PX or using at the drinking the soda or going to the canteen. So this was their lots of leisure time for some of the POWs, especially the Italians. This is an example of Italian POWs playing cards during their off time. And that was a major complaint about a lot of the citizens, especially in the Port Clinton area, where they said we were coddling the prisoners of war. We were giving them extra versus what RGIs were going through in Europe. This is an example of a POW painting that was done, and that's at the Ottawa County Historical Museum. This was part of that art that they mentioned earlier, an example of an Italian POW artwork. This is a nativity scene carving done by an Italian POW from scrap wood that was left behind, and that's on display at the museum, but I thought that was kind of interesting and the kind of work that was done there. We treated these prisoners pretty good. Let's be frank about it. When my father-in-law was in World War II, he was in a medical corps, And they treated over 30,000 wounded soldiers. And he gave stories back where a lot of times they would treat the Germans as well as they did the Italians, or as well as they did their own troops. And so we were pretty fair all across the way. And this is now POWs, German POWs bringing meat at Camp Perry. So once, if you notice on the cover of the book, there's a picture of Italians in the cafeteria. The prisoners of war did the food part. They made the food, they helped with our supervision. And this is what an example of Germans preparing meat, grinding meat for the dinner. This is kind of interesting. This was from a newspaper article I came across. It says Germans took pride in their cooking and used recipes from their homeland. This is a newspaper reporter back at that time. It happened that I was passing two huge ovens. A prisoner baker opened the door of one oven. The smell was something that cannot be described. I got the prisoner to open the door a couple more times, and sensing my pleasure of aroma, he grinned. In the oven reopened was a huge piece of pastry. Over it was the prisoner sprinkling cinnamon. The cake must have been fully a yard long and 2 feet wide. The prisoner volunteered. It's no good, eh? For a fleeting moment, I was tempted to remain behind and become a volunteer prisoner, at least until the Keuren was completely baked and sampled. But I did get a taste of it. So I thought that was kind of a cool article, that there was some humor involved with all of this. No. Just the officers. They had the foot of whether or not they worked. All right, Jeremy. Got a stall here. Okay,
There we go.
okay. This is, I mentioned the Germans like beer. This was from a newspaper article, and it talked about the beer that that they had and that they were able to get. It's the one interesting thing is that cigarettes were called Spuds, and they were menthol cigarettes. And Floyd Spud from Mingo Junction, Ohio, down around Steubenville, manufactured those cigarettes and sold them to the prisoner of war camps. But it said that they apparently didn't like the American beer. That was in a newspaper article. This is an example of food being fed to the prisoners at Thomas A. Scott menu in Fort Wayne. And you can see breakfast, pretty good. Lunch, pretty good. Dinner, not bad. So they were eating pretty well. And Howard, this next one kind of talks about the. We can get it.
Famous was one of the most famous reporters in America. He spoke like he was on that telegram.
Yeah, I'm trying to find some.
Was one of the most famous reporters in America. He spoke like he was on that telegram.
Could end the show and we say
No, that's right. Yeah. What the deal was with the food is that a lot of times, especially at Port Clinton in that area, people were upset because Geneva Convention said that you had to pay or feed the prisoners of war the same kind of food you would GIs. So the food was pretty good versus the rationing that was going on at that time across our country. And so in essence, what I was trying to show there is the prisoners of war were eating better than the people that were living in the community. This is an example of a hutment at Camp Perry. Now, when I was there, there were like 6 Germans and 9 Italian hutments. They would house 5 prisoners of war. There would be a stove that would it doesn't show here, but there would be a stove that would go up through the roof, and it would be a wood burning stove that they would have. But it was later used after the war for some of the activities at Camp Perry. But 5 people in a hut. When I was doing some presentations a couple of years ago, this lady said that my father was at a POW camp in Europe, in Germany, and she said he didn't have any kind like this at all. They were just thrown in together, no food, cold, no provisions. And so again, here's an example of what we did a pretty good job with this principles of war. All right, let's see if this works now. Clearly it doesn't.
Marion was important for the POWs at Camp Perry. Connect with their relatives and family back home. They were always looking forward to mail and sending it to people. POWs at Camp Perry were permitted just 1 letter and 1 postcard per week. The letter had to be
conditions.
Mail was important for the POWs at Camp Perry. Connect with their relatives and family back home. They were always looking forward to mail and sending and receiving. The POWs at Camp Perry were permitted just 1 letter.
This is an example of a postcard that a German POW sent home. They could only have 9 lines on the postcard. Letter you could have 2 lines, but this was one that was sent home, and it kind of talks about. Certainly imagine how happy he was that I read. So that was one example of the type of mail that was sent. I mentioned the erie proving grounds. There's a civilian working with the POWs at erie proving grounds. This is where they rehab 70% of the mobile artillery by the United States, and that this was an ongoing kind of thing all the time. And 5,000 people at this particular site. This erie proving grounds, you can see what kind of work this was being done. This was a busy place. You had 5,000 people working. You had truckloads of the artillery units, all calibers being shipped across from the United States for installation across to Europe. So people were required, in some cases, almost asked to house the workers there. So what happened in Port Clinton, the government came across and built 259 family homes, where were boxed. They're still there today, but there'd be homes clustered together with a courtyard in between. And so that housed a lot of the civilians that were working at the erie proving ground. And then they also built some dorms at that site. But some of these are still there today as an example. Prisoner of war privileges. This is where the Italian prisoners of war were visiting Toledo Museum of Art. They were taken a tour there. Again, people said this is coddling the prisoners of war. There was major complaints about this. And Congressman Alan Weichel from Sandusky, Ohio, said, "I protest the pampering and hero worship of those who killed our boys. It's an insult to the fathers and mothers who gave their sons. The War Department is not authorized to use our boys as cannon fodder for the enemy and then make heroes out of the killers." He sent this to the War Department, and it was a long letter, but I just tried to paraphrase it. And they, in turn, stopped the tour of Sandusky, Ohio at that time. When I was doing a presentation in one of the libraries in the Cleveland area, and this couple raised their hand and said, my father was a POW at Camp Perry, and he married Lydia, who they lived in the Cleveland area, but she dated him while he was at Camp Perry. And when she was 17 at the time, so she had to wait a year, and she went back there and they got married in 1947 in Italy and then came back to the United States. But he had good stories about it. And then this is an example. When they came back to Camp Perry, there was an article there and it said captured by love. And the two of them are there and you can see the hutments in the background. And so it was kind of a story. And a lot of this happened with Italians. And I'm sure some Germans too, but in the Clinton area, that a lot of this took place when people came back. Thought that was pretty cool. Wilmington, Camp Wilmington, where they did the corn, picked corn for hogs. This is Germans again taking a break at this time, and then having some drink. Trial Hospital, look at how big it was at that time. They had 153 acres, 100 buildings, treated over 15,000 wounded soldiers, and that's the layout of the hospital. Jim Banks has done a nice job with the museum there. This is a hutman at Cryle Hospital. This is where the Germans were held at that. This is a German prisoner of war was shot at the hospital. The German, the guard thought the German was assaulting him. He lost his balance, and so he shot the prisoner. And the guard went through a court-martial proceeding, was found not guilty. But there were like 32 prisoners that were buried at the camps, and then they were moved to Camp Butler in Springfield, Illinois. So there are German prisoners of war buried there at Camp Butler from the Midwest. This was the Drawful Newspaper was a government newspaper that was sent to all the camps. And this was posted at Camp Perry by the Nazis, which said, do Americans believe they can force upon us a newspaper of traitors and deserters? And so it goes on to say, you better not read this. This is no good. It was posted at Camp Perry. And that's when it was pretty hostile at that time. There wasn't a move to redo that. We had re-education programs. Camp Perry had some of their sites that had re-education. It was the English and history were a major thrust at that time. And as you can see, I put down priority was to instill the minds of POWs the respect for American institutions, traditions, and way of life, and thought before being repatriated. So we tried to do a re-education program. Camp Perry was a big site for doing that. It was a volunteer program. The Italians took part in some cases, Germans did in some cases, but this was kind of to get them ready when they got repatriated back again. And I did have a video comment about that, but I'm going to try it once. This is the newspaper that the Germans did at Camp Perry. Basically, it ran from October through December of 1945 because the last German prisoner of war, the last prisoner of war in Ohio, left in February of 1946. So this was a newspaper that was run by the Germans at Camp Perry and then distributed through the other camps. Excuse me. This was a joke that they had sections of jokes in the paper. They had sections of organized athletics. And you can see, excuse me, water alone makes one mute, as proven by fish and water. Wine cure makes one stupid, dense, as proven by the gentleman at the next table. But since I don't want to be either, I mix water with wine. So that was their kind of joke that was in the newspaper. You can see there's this was someone coming out now against the Germans in the paper. This was written by a German, and it was basically saying, when we come back to our country, we need to reorganize it. We cannot be ruled by military, rule over people. And so this German took a real chance by publishing this in the paper at Perry. It started there in 1945 toward the end, where Germans were recognizing they were defeated, that they had to, when they're repatriated, they had to look at their government, make some changes. That's the way it's being run. And so this was the step out. This was, I had mentioned before that Germans really, in the beginning, ran those camps. And there was a breaking point for some of the soldiers, the prisoners of war there. And what happened was that there were some strikes. Camp Perry at that time had a strike in 1940, what was it, 1945, March of 1945, of 2,200 prisoners. They were upset because they were disciplined too much. And so they went out. E.C. McCormick, the commander-in-chief there, said, too bad, you get bread and water for the next 3 days. And then they finally went back and stopped the strike. Camp Marion had a strike of about 220 German prisoners of war. And their beef was that they had to work in the rain. So they went on strike. And again, McCormick went over there and said, you're not in charge, I am. And you're going to get bread and water. So they finally stopped that. This is an example of at Camp Marion, the kind of work that was done was where they rehabbed the equipment. And I did a following book of this about the contamination of the school district there because of some of this work they did. Now, I don't know if this is going to come through, Jeremy, but I would like to, I wish it would. This is a video clip. Okay. When I did the POW book, came across some of the contamination issues that were at some of the camps, and in this one particularly, the sites of the various contamination on the school site as identified by the EPA. And so I did a book about that, just published it in what was it, February, I guess, of this year. And I called it the school poisoning tragedy in Caledonia, Ohio, where where the schools are built on top of toxic waste dumps. And a lot of the kids that went there that graduated end up with cancer later. And it's kind of a tragedy that wasn't told. And I've been pushing some of our Congress people to kind of take a look at the healthcare program for these people that are contaminated. There's no one person my daughter knows what happened. He ended up with a brain tumor, and his father was going to sue the government because of the contamination. And so he went to some lawyers, and the lawyers looked at it, and he said, we can't help you because we can't sue big government. We won't get anywhere with it. So I've been pushing Mercy Capture, and I've been pushing Sherrod Brown and Anthony Gonzalez. I've had good conversations with, even though he's not going to be up for re-election, about looking at this and doing a study of how this could be improved for these kind of people. So that was my passion. This is camp. This is as it is today. Camp Perry City Administrative of the Administrative Center. At that time, it was a PX, and they used it for areas of like for haircuts, barbers, other kinds of things. But today it's the office. I worked with, if you've ever been to Maps Air Museum, you got to go. It's really spectacular in North Canton, Ohio. It's at the at the airport at Akron Canton Airport. And so what I worked with a gentleman there. We set up a booth of about POWs in Ohio, and you can see a lot of the pictures and articles are from my book. And what we tried to show that there was another part of the war, and that this became a display at this particular museum in Canton. And then I don't know if this will work. So that's kind of my summary of the book. It took me 2 years to do. Did a few interviews. Like I said, Peggy Diamond from it was really helped with the photos. Camp Perry administrators helped me with a lot of gave me permission to take photos and site, gave me some information about it. Library at Iowa Library has a trove of articles dating back to the 1840s. Book. So, like I said, I just released a book that's pushing to see if there's equity in this country. So there can be people that didn't have any help here. Any questions you may have? Yes.
One little brief.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. There was a couple escapes. One that 2 prisoners of war, they were working in Fostoria at a plant there out of Camp Perry. And so they left the plant, and the downtown Columbus, and a GI that ex-GI saw these 2 prisoners of war downtown Columbus, and they had GI boots on, and they were walking against a red light. So he grabbed them and sent them back to Camp Perry. And then there was another escape there where the person escaped and hung themselves outside the camp because he had been so depressed, and he would have been beat up by the hardcore Nazis at Camp Perry. And but those are probably about 2 of the ones I've come across. Very infrequent escapes. Oh, okay, yeah.
Never had any issue.
Yeah. And there's, I came across some articles about where they did agriculture work on farms and stuff in the area, and they said the same thing. These are German prisoners of war that worked there. They said they didn't smile, but they were hardcore workers. Where he had some problem with Italians because they were so affable and kind of relaxed, and got to make them work a little harder. So that was kind of the difference between the 2. Yes. Yeah. See, that was released. That's House Bill 2372 is trying to address that at Congress at the level, and then the Senate's trying to address another bill. So what I tried to do is I sent to several Congress people, here's why not supplement that? And they said, well, because it was in the Veterans Committee, you can't add anything to it that doesn't include it's outside veterans. So yeah, I tried. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it got nowhere. So I'm still pressing. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah. Long term. Yeah. Anything else? Sure. Yes. The ones that Camp Perry. Yes. Right. but they had to be repatriated first. So
They never went back home.
back home. But there's an interesting thing. The last POW in the United States left in June of 1946, but 371 Germans were left in a penal situation, and a couple Italians and one Japanese were still in a penal prison. But yet they had to go home first, and then they came back. Like what I showed you, they came back after he was repatriated, but they had to go back and then they came here. Yes, sir. There probably is, but I'm not aware. All right, well, thank you very much. Sorry the volume didn't work on some of these. Would have enhanced it some, but thank you for your time, and thank you. Have a good week. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Like I said, I hope to see you all next week or not next week, next month for our next brown bag. Now that will be we'll have a digital speaker, but you can all still come and watch in person.